The summer of 1939 was unlike any other in Poland. Streets bustled with laughter, markets overflowed with fresh produce, and soldiers in crisp uniforms strolled proudly beneath fluttering red and white flags. Yet, behind the smiles, whispers of war echoed in every corner. The air was thick with unease, an invisible storm waiting to break. Across the countryside, Polish troops stood at quiet outposts, scanning the horizon under fading sunsets. Their rifles gleamed, their eyes uncertain. In Warsaw, inside government offices, leaders bent over maps covered with inked borders and handwritten notes, symbols of a fragile peace they knew could shatter at any moment. For a brief moment, life carried on. Children played in city squares, unaware that their laughter would soon be drowned by sirens. Farmers harvested wheat under a sky soon to be filled with planes. Poland stood proud, defiant, and unprepared for what history had in store. The storm was coming, and the world would never be the same again. After reclaiming its sovereignty in 1918, Poland stood proud but precarious, a young nation surrounded by giants that neither trusted nor accepted its rebirth. To the west, Adolf Hitler's Germany burned with resentment over the Treaty of Versailles, longing to reclaim lands lost to Poland. To the east, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union watched with equal hostility, dreaming of pushing its borders further west. Despite these threats, Poland tried to walk a tightrope of diplomacy. Non-aggression pacts were signed with both neighbors, gestures meant to preserve peace, though everyone sensed their fragility. Beneath the surface, both Germany and the Soviet Union viewed Poland not as a partner, but as prey. Polish leaders, aware of their vulnerable position, scrambled to strengthen alliances with France and Britain. Yet the guarantees they received were words on paper, promises that would prove hollow when the storm arrived. Meanwhile, ordinary Poles went about their lives. Farmers tending their fields, children heading to school, soldiers standing guard at quiet borders. Few could imagine how quickly their world would change. In the uneasy calm before September 1939, Poland was a proud nation, but one trapped between two ruthless powers, each preparing to strike. In late August 1939, while Europe held its breath, two bitter ideological enemies met in the shadows. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, fascism and communism, shook hands in secret. The world would soon know this moment as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that masked one of the most cynical deals in history. Behind closed doors in Moscow, under the dim glow of chandeliers, Germany's Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet diplomat Vyacheslav Molotov signed the agreement. Smiles were exchanged, but the ink on the page concealed betrayal. Hidden within the treaty's secret protocol was the plan to carve up Eastern Europe, and Poland was the centerpiece of that division. In Berlin and Moscow, propaganda celebrated the deal as a triumph of diplomacy. But for the people of Poland, it sealed their fate. They were surrounded on both sides by forces plotting their destruction. The agreement gave Hitler the confidence to invade without fear of a Soviet response, while Stalin prepared to claim his share once the Germans struck first. It was a pact not of peace, but of predation, two powers united by greed, ambition, and the cold calculation that Poland would soon vanish from the map. At dawn on September 1, 1939, Poland awoke to thunder, not from the sky but from the engines of German tanks. Without a formal declaration of war, Hitler's army surged across the border. This was Blitzkrieg, lightning war, a strategy designed to overwhelm before the enemy could even react. Columns of panzers tore through the countryside, their treads grinding over farmland and roads. Overhead, the roar of the Luftwaffe filled the air as bombs rained down on Polish defenses and cities alike. Within hours, communication lines were cut, railways destroyed, and chaos rippled across the front. In the small town of Westerplatte, Polish soldiers found themselves surrounded by overwhelming firepower. Yet they fought back with incredible courage, holding off the German assault for 7 days despite impossible odds. Across the nation, Similar acts of defiance erupted as Polish troops tried desperately to slow the German advance. But Poland was fighting a machine built for speed and destruction. While brave men and women resisted on the ground, they faced an enemy that moved with mechanical precision and ruthless efficiency. In the smoke and dust of the first days, the world witnessed a terrifying new kind of warfare, swift, brutal, and unstoppable. Poland's last stand had begun, and the world would soon be engulfed by it. The German war machine pressed forward with relentless force, but across Poland, resistance burned fiercely. From the forests to the city streets, soldiers and civilians alike fought not only for survival, but for honor. In Warsaw, Polish defenders transformed their beloved city into a fortress. Streets became battlegrounds, homes became command posts, and rubble became shields. With limited weapons, they stood against overwhelming odds. Young men and women, students, laborers, and soldiers joined hands to defend every inch of their homeland. At dawn, machine guns rattled through the streets as Polish troops exchanged fire with advancing German infantry. The Westerplatte garrison, outnumbered and outgunned, held its position far longer than anyone thought possible. Its defense became a symbol of defiance across the world. Even as the Luftwaffe's bombs scorched the skies, Polish anti-aircraft crews shot back, and fighter pilots soared into battle, meeting German bombers head-on. A Polish officer, bloodied and exhausted, climbed atop a shattered barricade, rallying his men with a cry, "For Poland! For freedom!" His courage sparked a final push, a desperate stand that echoed the spirit of a nation refusing to surrender. Though the Polish forces would eventually be overwhelmed, their bravery became legend. The courage of those days, of soldiers, citizens, and families who refused to bow, remains the heartbeat of Poland's story. As the German Blitzkrieg tore through Poland, the cost of resistance grew unbearable. Cities once filled with laughter now burned under endless bombardment. Civilians fled in every direction, clutching children and the few belongings they could carry. The roads became rivers of refugees, terrified faces illuminated by the flames of their own homes. The German army's advance was ruthless. Entire villages were destroyed under the pretense of harboring resistance fighters. Soldiers executed civilians in the streets, while the SS and Gestapo began their systematic campaign of terror, targeting teachers, priests, and community leaders to break the nation's spirit. In basements and cellars, Polish families huddled together, listening to the distant rumble of tanks and the whistle of falling bombs. Above them, the world they knew was reduced to rubble. Meanwhile, in the shadows, small groups of resistance fighters refused to surrender. In dark rooms lit by oil lamps, they drew maps, shared intelligence, and vowed revenge. They were few, poorly armed, and constantly hunted, yet they fought on, believing that freedom was worth any sacrifice. By the end of September, tens of thousands were dead, cities lay in ruins, and the world had witnessed the beginning of a darkness that would stretch far beyond Poland's borders. As Warsaw burned and German forces advanced, many Poles turned their eyes eastward. Hope flickered that the Soviet Union, a sworn rival of Nazi Germany, would intervene to stop the invasion. But that hope was cruelly misplaced. On September 17, 1939, the Red Army crossed Poland's eastern border. Instead of liberators, they came as conquerors. Stalin's troops poured across the countryside with tanks and armored columns, claiming they were there to protect Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities. In truth, it was the final act of the secret pact with Hitler. Polish soldiers, already fighting desperately in the West, suddenly found themselves trapped between two enemies. Confusion spread. Some units hesitated, unsure whether the Soviets were friend or foe, until the gunfire answered for them. In towns and villages, disbelief turned to despair. Families who had prayed for help now watched Soviet troops march through their streets, their red stars gleaming under the gray autumn sky. For many, the betrayal cut deeper than any bomb. The fall of Poland was now inevitable. With the German army pressing from one side and the Soviet army from the other, the nation that had stood proud for 20 years was torn apart in just 4 weeks. By mid-September 1939, Warsaw stood alone. German troops surrounded the Polish capital on all sides, but inside the city walls, resistance refused to die. The siege of Warsaw became a battle not only for territory, but for the nation's soul. German artillery and bombers pounded the city relentlessly. Day after day, explosions tore through the skyline, leveling entire neighborhoods. Civilians filled the streets with shovels and buckets, rushing to put out fires or rescue survivors from the rubble. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and courage. At command posts, officers mapped defense lines as reports came in from every quarter. Ammunition was low, water scarce, yet no one spoke of surrender. Women and children carried supplies through the streets under falling bombs. Church bells rang faintly between air raid sirens, reminding the people that faith still lived amid destruction. On the rooftops, anti-aircraft crews fought back against swarms of Luftwaffe bombers. Young gunners, many barely trained, fired until their weapons overheated. Below, Polish infantry clung to barricades made of overturned trams, sandbags, and debris. For nearly 3 weeks, Warsaw endured. When the city finally fell on September 28, it was not defeat that defined it, but endurance. The ruins of the capital became a symbol of defiance that would echo throughout the rest of the war. Poland might have fallen, but its spirit had not. By early October 1939, Poland's fight had come to its tragic end. German and Soviet forces closed their iron grip from both sides, crushing the last pockets of defense. The once defiant Polish army, outnumbered and surrounded, could no longer hold the line. On the outskirts of Warsaw and across the countryside, exhausted soldiers laid down their weapons. Tears mixed with the dust of the battlefield as men who had fought for every inch of their homeland surrendered to enemies they despised. Yet, even in defeat, there was dignity. They had fought not for victory, but for honor, and for that, history would remember them. Cities lay in ruins, their streets silent except for the echo of marching boots. German and Soviet troops paraded through what remained of Polish towns, dividing the spoils of conquest. For the people, occupation meant fear, hunger, and loss, but also quiet defiance. Families clung together, uncertain of what the future would bring, yet refusing to abandon hope entirely. Though Poland fell, its spirit did not. The seeds of resistance that would later grow into underground movements and secret armies were already taking root, waiting for the day when the nation could rise again. In the autumn of 1939, Poland's armies fell silent, but their courage still echoes through time. The defense of Poland was not just a story of defeat, but of defiance, an unyielding stand that inspired generations. Amid the ashes of war, a nation's identity endured, carried by those who refused to forget. Today, memorials and silent fields mark where freedom once bled, reminding us that courage often shines brightest in the face of hopeless odds. Poland's last stand was not the end, it was the beginning of a legacy that continues to shape how the world remembers resistance, unity, and the price of liberty. If this story moved you, explore more of World War II's untold chapters in our upcoming documentaries. Subscribe, share, and keep the memory alive. Together, we honor history and those who refused to surrender.